Hello everybody and welcome to the world of French football, where I can tell you the sun is shining this morning. It's shining down here in Marseille after OM clinched their first victory over PSG at the Velodrome in 14 years. And it's shining in the capital after Ousmane Dembélé was crowned Ballon d'Or winner. It's a very unusual moment to see Marseille and PSG celebrating on the same evening. But Monday was a remarkable day. And to discuss all of that and the rest of the big Ligue 1 stories, I am delighted to welcome back the French football expert, Jonathan Johnson. Jonathan, it was an exciting night, wasn't it, on Monday? Were you in front of the Ballon d'Or ceremony or the Classique?
Oh, great to be back on. Thanks for the invitation, and what a weekend it was. Extended weekend after all as well. I was on the split screen by the end of Le Classique. Obviously had to keep an eye on what was going on in Paris as well. But no, fantastic couple of days for French football overall. I think, regardless of obviously the slightly disappointing result on the Monday for those of Parisian persuasion.
Indeed, but maybe it was about time Marseille got a home win over PSG. I'm thrilled to welcome debutant first appearance for George Boxall, who is a Marseille-based journalist. And George, I know that you were watching the Classique because you were at the Velodrome. You, like me, you had the pleasure of witnessing a very, very intense and exciting game of football. How are you doing, George? Have you recovered from the excitement?
You know what? It was a rude awakening this morning, given all the adrenaline and the pure euphoria of last night. I mean, just want to say thanks for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to make my debut alongside two very esteemed French football journalists, especially Mr. Jonathan Johnson, who I'm glad to say has been a bit of a mentor figure over the years in my fledgling journalist career. But the game itself amazing, atmosphere amazing, and a bit of a rude awakening. I know it's a similar situation for you as well, Matt.
Well, it's just it's hard to sleep after such an intense evening. I was commentating, and I think I chatted to you straight after the game, George, and we agreed that intense was the word, because it probably wasn't a scintillating game of football. When you look at the sort of the goal-mouth incidents, there were some pretty hairy moments. There was, Hakimi's shot that squirmed just wide. If you don't know what happened, by the way, Marseille scored early. Bit of an error in judgment from the new PSG goalkeeper, Lucas Chevalier, and Naïf Aguerd headed in. That was inside the first 5 minutes. Marseille controlled things pretty well, I thought, in the first half. PSG, who were shorn of Dembélé, Barcola, Doué and Neves, did up the ante in the second half, and Marseille had to really dig deep to get the victory. But it was a dramatic night, and we're going to start by focusing on that Marseille's victory that brings them up to 9 points. So it means it's much closer at the top now. JJ, we're going to go with our traditional heroes and villains, but focusing only on this particular game because there's so much to talk about. JJ, we'll start with you. Your hero from the Classique.
I mean, I think it's difficult really to look sort of beyond the obvious, and I think Aguerd, generally in this kind of fixture on either side of the divide, if you score a goal in a Classique and it proves to be the winning goal, I think you automatically kind of write yourself into club folklore. So I'd say that Naïf Aguerd definitely sort of merits being sort of the hero. I think it's a bit of an obvious choice, but ultimately, sort of one goal separating the two teams. I think you've already touched on the fact that it maybe wasn't the most scintillating of editions of Le Classique ever. And yes, PSG had some absentees. Yes, we can also, ask questions of Lucas Chevalier and some fairly cavalier goalkeeping. I think we can say, sort of slight play on his name. But, I think ultimately it's a great thing for Ligue 1 and for French football that Marseille have gotten a win in this fixture for the first time since I think it was 2011, so the very early days of sort of Qatari ownership of PSG. So I think it's a great thing for the competitiveness of Ligue 1, even if there are sort of extenuating circumstances, I guess, around the result. So for me, I think when you score a goal, it proves to be the winning goal in this kind of game, you're automatically not necessarily a club legend, but definitely an iconic figure.
He's on his way, isn't he? I mean, what a start Naif Aguerd has made. He made his debut against Lorient in a 4-0 win, scored, clean sheet. Same against Paris Saint-Germain. He missed the Real Madrid game because he got a bang to his head. You're obviously right, John. Massive for Marseille, and ultimately good for Ligue 1. I think maybe PSG fans might not agree with me, but George, when you see the scenes that you witnessed last night at the final whistle, the 65,000 supporters going mad, and we saw the interviews afterwards. De Zerbi absolutely delighted, and Mehdi Benatia as well. It is huge. So just reflect on that in telling us your hero of the night, George.
Yeah, I mean, as you can tell, these Marseille supporters have been starved of any sort of crumb of success against this PSG side for so long. Obviously, the Ligue 1 win at home since 2011. But my hero, bit of a left of field kind of suggestion, is actually Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. He actually got a bit of stick from some local media just last week, saying it was quite a funny anecdote about how Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, he's a bit of if he was a baker, he'd only be doing bread, baguettes, never a croissant, never a millefeuille, with the kind of southern accent on paying for bread. And I think last night, I think he brought out a pan suisse, very substantial performance for him. It's the first time I've really kind of seen that from Højbjerg in a very long time. He had a really good link up with Matt O'Reilly, and those two really kind of set that really intense pressing that we saw especially in the first half. And you kind of forget they have a really good relationship, O'Reilly and Højbjerg, because of their time in the Denmark national team, and they play with each other all the time. So he is my hero really for setting that intensity and setting that press early on, which really bothered Luis Enrique's side, especially with Enrique lining up with the 3-4-3 early on. And it really bothered PSG at the start, that high press, which was set from the midfield.
Yeah, George, I just want to ask you a question, because it was you told me the pam boulanger Højbjerg thing last night, and it was very funny when you did it with your Marseille accent. And just let me know, like, why, because you're a lad from Brighton. I know you were living in Paris for a bit. You're down in Marseille now. Why did you make the move down there? And and like, what do you make of this city?
Guys, first of all, before George answers, I'm going to have to jump in here because you've spoiled my villain of the week, Matt. The fact that George swapped Paris for Marseille just in time for this victory, I think is,
he's the villain.
Is very suspect.
It's a bit like like a kind of like a Star Wars kind of betrayal kind of narrative, swapping Paris for Marseille. I did actually live in Paris for 5 years, and my kind of early work in French football was well, not so much to do with PSG, but the Red Star when they were in the third division. I wrote a dissertation about Red Star. And that kind of gave me a bit of a platform to start talking about French football in general. And I think after a few years, I think it was basically too expensive for me to stay where I was staying in Paris. I moved home for a little bit, and then I think I naturally got to the end of a cycle where I wanted a bit of a new challenge. And being from Brighton, and especially being full of the nostalgia, especially for the De Zerbi years at Brighton and where he took us as a team, and a lot of memories that I have from especially the first European game at the Velodrome. I think Marseille was kind of always in the back of my head since that first European game in Europa League, the 2-2 draw at the Velodrome. So it's kind of been niggling at me a little bit. And I think when it came to deciding what was my next move, I think the De Zerbi story, in terms of the potential for drama, the potential for chaos, and the potential for scenes like we saw last night, was just too intriguing not to turn down on a personal level. and also I don't have any real big connections to PSG to be kind of, I didn't really feel that affinity with PSG to kind of look down on or snub Marseille. So there you go.
You're muted, Matt.
Yeah, sorry. Just saying, Stephen, you're going to have to cut here. George, sorry, I missed the end of what you were saying, but I think we're back. We're good now. So I'm going to come back in. Yeah, JJ, I know you're disappointed that George, left life in Paris, left you effectively for Marseille. But I've got to say, so I met him yesterday for the first time properly. We had briefly bumped into each other in Paris, but we had a coffee, and I can tell you he has settled in properly to life in Marseille. We're sitting on this terrace at the Cours Julien, having a nice coffee. Raphael was there as well. A lovely little moment. And then this random local who happened to be this blonde lady with sunglasses and quite a short skirt, to be honest, comes up and goes, George, comment ça va, George? And the next thing I know, there's La Bise, there's, what's going on? What do you think about the game tonight? I'm like, wow, this guy's like a local. So, fair play, George. We're going off topic a little bit, but I just had to get that out. He didn't introduce me to the lady, which is fine because I'm a happily married man. So your hero, George, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, I think it's a great shout, by the way, because I do think he's the kind of player they need as well, or they needed him to perform last night, because he's just got that. He brings that calm, doesn't he, to what is such a frenetic environment, and he could put his foot on the ball, and thought he dictated the game very well. My hero, very quickly, I'm going to go for the goalkeeper, Geronimo Rulli. He didn't have as busy a night as he did at the Bernabeu. I think he had 10 saves in the first half against Real Madrid. He only had a handful of saves, but he was full of authority. A really good piece of goalkeeping to deny, was it Fabian Ruiz when he came out and tackled him, and then that save in the second half to deny Hakimi. The ball almost sort of squeezed inside the far post, but Rulli got just enough on that. So I think he's become a leader, a really important player for them. So we'll turn to the dark side now, Jonathan. Your villain. Well, no, you've already decided George is your villain, have you? Or?
No, so I was just kidding around, but he is a villain of sorts. But I'm glad to hear, based on what you just told us about your grass, sometimes is greener on the other side, apparently. But no, I think my villain for this one, there's a few candidates for it. I'd love to think I could get away with arguing that Roberto De Zerbi was a bit of a villain for sort of spoiling the affair a bit towards the end of the game, but I don't think that either of you are going to let me get away with that. So I think I'm going to have to go for a bit more of an obvious candidate. And I think that Lucas Chevalier does have to go down as a villain this week. Obviously, he's had a couple of heroic moments so far since joining PSG, notably sort of snatching a victorious performance from the jaws of defeat in the Super Cup against Spurs, and he's had a relatively solid start to the season. Made a fantastic save last time I was at Parc des Princes for a Ligue 1 game against Lens. But I think for this one, this is the first time I think where people are going to be taking a few pot shots at Chevalier and asking, is life after Donnarumma really as sort of flawless as it's been made out to be? So I think when you misjudge something like that and it ultimately turns out to cost your team, especially at the time when the team is undermanned, missing a number of really sort of key absentees, especially in such unique circumstances as well. I think to have seen the game pushed back 24 hours, for it to be coinciding with the Ballon d'Or ceremony when so many of his teammates as well were being, sort of lauded for their achievements in the game over the last 12 months or so. I think you need to be more assured in that kind of moment. And it's very unlike Chevalier as well, because he doesn't really tend to sort of lapse into those mistakes too often. It felt like it was more one of concentration. Maybe for him it was a little bit of a unique experience, sort of taking part in sort of France's fiercest rivalry, with all due respect to the Northern Derby, which obviously he sampled many times as a player, and perhaps sort of not having that element of away support also sort of played into his mind. But at the end of the day, I think that's just sort of looking for excuses and clutching at straws, really, because I think a goalkeeper of Chevalier's quality and caliber, and he showed it again towards the end of the game, making a great save one-on-one against, I think it was Aubameyang. So ultimately, I do think that Chevalier's error, did cost PSG on the night, so has to be my villain.
Yeah, while Donnarumma was picking up his award in Paris as well. It's going to be interesting to see how Chevalier responds to that. Obviously, really important that he comes back. And I just realised as you were talking there, John, that we didn't explain, just in case people haven't followed the whole postponement story. There were massive storms in Marseille on Sunday night. It was deemed impossible to play the game, and I think it would have been dangerous because George and I were down here and we saw the torrential downpour, but also just the lightning that was like non-stop around the city all evening. So the league had a difficult decision to make. Marseille said they want to follow the regulation, which is the game should be played the following day, if it can be played the following day. But of course, there was the Ballon d'Or ceremony, and PSG were reluctant to play on Monday night, or certainly would have preferred to play either earlier in the day or at a later date. They put forward a suggestion for early December. Marseille, I think, were quite insistent, and ultimately the decision was made. I don't think we're going to go through that whole sort of discussion. It has created a lot of debate in France, but the game took place. Marseille, if you like, got their way. The league ultimately stuck by their regulations. Personally, I think that's fine. Now I've given my view. Maybe I need to give your views. But very, very quickly, fine or not fine? George, decision okay?
Yeah, I think in the end I thought it was a good decision for the LFP. Not just because I work for their Ligue on the English website, but also I think it kept the focus on the football, and I think in the end of the day it will become in years to come a bit of a French football oddity. Seeing Dembélé pick up the Ballon d'Or, but PSG losing at the same time, and the PSG delegation coming to the Ballon d'Or with kind of very meek and muted kind of expressions on their face. But you know what? Dembélé won the Ballon d'Or in the end. PSG fans have that as a consolation. Well, it's probably more than a consolation, and Marseille fans are happy. Everyone is kind of happy at the end of this kind of scenario.
John, you happy? Well, what do you just very quickly? Do you think it's a fair decision or the wrong decision?
I mean, I think according to the rules, it is the right and the only decision really. So I don't think there's too much of an argument there. The only thing that I would add to that we haven't really touched on so far is there was also an element of PSG having the opportunity to sort of manage this and opting to my surprise, to return to Paris, having made the trip to Marseille, and then traveling once again, in the early hours of Monday ahead of the game. To me, that seemed a little bit unnecessary. Had it been me making the decision, I might have chosen otherwise. I didn't see the need to sort of add on extra travel to what was already a fairly tricky, and I'm not going to say unprecedented, because French football does have this habit of managing to create very unique situations for itself. But I would say that struck me as something where the impact of the LFP's decision could have been cushioned a little better.
Okay, I think that's a good point, Jonathan. They alluded to security reasons, I think logistical and security reasons, but I agree. I think there could have been a way of them staying down in Marseille, but we'll stick to the football, and we'll ask George for his villain of the piece.
Yeah, somewhat, maybe a bit controversial, but I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna say PSG manager Luis Enrique.
Is this because of his new haircut and the arm sling? He does look quite villainous.
He does a little bit, and the kind of with the kind of arm in the bandage, it's kind of Bond villain, or like Mr. Bean's Holiday, when that Clay Carson guy, played by Willem Dafoe, who does look a bit like Luis Enrique, kind of rocks up at the end as the villain. But I think he sort of set out his stall when he said, and his words might have been misinterpreted when he said that I'm gonna, I really enjoy quieting down stadiums or silencing Marseille fans. But I think if we're focusing purely on his decisions and PSG on the pitch, I think the formation PSG started with really played into Marseille's hands. The initial 3-4-3 looked a little ropey at the start. I also felt he waited a really long time to make his substitutions in the second half. For example, I think Mbaye should have come on earlier, and they generally, yeah, because he didn't make those choices early enough. PSG looked a bit leggy in the second half.
Interesting. So you're going for the man who's won 5 trophies in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Who is?
Because, look.
No, fair play. He's the flavour of the month right now, so it's good. You know, I and actually I'd agree with your comment about the substitutions. I think the 3 centre backs. Did you need to leave them on for quite that long? I'm not so sure. Yeah.
Here's one for both of you, actually. Would you have hooked Zaire Emery earlier in the game than Luis Enrique actually did? I would have taken Zaire Emery off. I thought it was at odds with the performance we saw a couple of weeks ago against Lens, but unfortunately in keeping with this kind of unfortunate glow down that Zaire Emery has had sort of over the last kind of year or so in terms of his form. Obviously difficult for him to break into that starting PSG midfield when everybody's fit, but it does kind of feel like there's a few more questions now about him than there were, especially, you know, in this a World Cup year where he'll be hoping to make the cut with Didier Deschamps at the end of the season. It just felt for me like he was, alongside Chevalier, probably one of the one of the less convincing performers on the Parisian side.
Maybe. I there were times in the game where I thought, gosh, he's still very mobile and strong, and he won quite a few balls. But I would take that point. I think Fabian Ruiz was below par. I thought Vitinha. I know George didn't totally agree with this when I mentioned it after the game, but I thought Vitinha was the one guy who was just, carrying such a threat and trying so hard to get PSG back into the game. Nearly scored an unbelievable 45-metre lob, had 3 shots that Geronimo Rulli saves. It was hard going for PSG in that midfield area. Just on subs, I'll ask your view on this, John. I think when Luis Enrique took Gonzalo Ramos off, I think it was the 88th, 89th minute, PSG obviously desperate for a goal. He is their goal poacher. For me, it was quite pointed. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I think there's an issue. I think Luis Enrique has never been the biggest fan of Ramos. And I feel like at the moment he's missing a lot of attackers and he needs Ramos to kind of step up. And he's not really doing that. I don't think he was particularly tidy in his general play. Is there an issue brewing? Am I reading too much into this?
I mean, I think Luis Enrique definitely played him out of necessity. I think it would have been the wrong decision had he benched Ramos from the start, because obviously that raised a few eyebrows a couple of weeks ago at Parc des Princes, where he selected Mayulu ahead of Ramos. But I think, you look at what happened during the game, had sort of that headed opportunity not taken a nick off of a Marseille head before it connected with Ramos, that might have been different. He might have been able to get the efforts on target. Who knows? Maybe even put it away. I personally, I'm a fan of Ramos and his profile. I think used in the right way, he can be very beneficial for PSG. I don't believe he gets enough game time to be really match ready and sharp enough to properly benefit PSG. But also it's understandable when you know how Luis Enrique sets up this PSG side that he doesn't opt to utilize somebody like Ramos more often than he does. So I think, unfortunately, Ramos's situation is the logical product of the fact that really, when all of the attacking players are fully fit, there isn't an obvious starting role for Gonzalo Ramos. So is there a problem brewing? Not necessarily because of this, but I think generally, in terms of whether or not PSG and Ramos continue together beyond the end of this season, I think there's reason to believe that it's probably time for the two to separate at some point, which would be a big shame, because I think that in terms of pure goal-scoring predatory skills, I think that Ramos is arguably the best kind of player that PSG have had since Cavani for that.
Okay, interesting. We're going to wrap up on Marseille PSG. My villain, I'm going to go for a handful of Marseille supporters who were sitting just in front of me. I feel a bit like Andy Scott saying this, but it's obviously incredible, a wonderful experience to be commentating a game like this in the Velodrome. But the thing is, right, you've got these supporters and they're kind of in VIP seats because I'm very lucky. I'm over the halfway line and it's an amazing view. But as soon as there's an incident, and there were a few incidents that, could have gone to VAR. Marseille had a goal ruled out for offside in the first half. There was also a moment in the second half. I think it was Aubameyang going through and was taken down in the box. And in the end, the flag had been raised and he was offside. So as soon as something happens like this, these supporters, they lean back and they're like pulling your arm and stuff, saying, is he onside? Is he offside? What are the pictures saying? And I'm like, guys, I'm trying to commentate this to an international audience. I'm trying to, so I'm trying to, appease them and sort of focus very much on my commentary. So they're the villains. It's a little bit of a bugbear on a night that generally went very smoothly and very well. I'm just going to ask one final question because I think it's important after such a big victory for Marseille. George, I've just been calculating very quickly in my head. I think there were 7 new players starting for Marseille last night, including the record signing PSG, the Brazilian, who I don't think did particularly well. But how, without, I'm not asking you to analyse PSG, but the team in itself, do you think it is gelling? Do you think when De Zerbi says our season starts now, which is what he said the night they beat Lorient, i.e. we want to put August behind us now, the Ro Rabiot stuff is finished, new team, new era. Do you think they're up and running, or can you see a sort of a defeat coming straight away at Strasbourg on Friday, new crisis, etc.?
I think that that international break where we saw Rabiot and Ro depart the club after the fight gate, as I now call it, that really kind of, in my eyes, acted as a new pre-season. It's almost like there's a before and there's an after, and it's almost like August is just kind of forgotten about, gone to the bin now, and especially with all the new signings coming into that side. There's promising signs because you've signed a lot of experience. You've got a 2018 World Cup winner there. You've got Pavard. You've got Aguerd, Premier League proven. Emerson, Premier League proven. Jury's still out on how effective he can be, but he's only just making his first steps at Marseille. So it is essentially a new team for Marseille. And in terms of gelling, I did notice, especially in the training session before the Classique, that the atmosphere around the team is still a bit pensive. There's still a sense that these players don't really know each other. They're solid, they're stable, they're good players. There's still a sense that they, on a human level, which De Zerbi works off a lot, they don't really know each other that well. And I actually said to a colleague, I wouldn't be surprised if they ended up doing another stage or another Ritero at some point. And then I jokingly said, oh, maybe to Rome. Maybe they'll go to Rome again. And then it was, announced a few days later that they were going back to Rome. Really to try and find that cohesion between the players, that human connection, because they don't really know each other.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I was watching the defenders at times, and I noticed obviously Bellerdi's very expressive, but Pavard next to him as well. They were talking all the time. They were so kind of tuned in, trying to make sure they were aligned, watching where the wing backs were. And you just wonder whether, I wondered at the time, can they do that? Can they maintain that focus for the whole 90 minutes against PSG? And they did. So, players of that experience, I think, is really going to help.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, De Zerbi said this last night as well. In my team talk, I've already threatened them for the game against Strasbourg. I've already warned them that you have to kind of replicate the intensity, the same kind of performance that you showed against Real Madrid and PSG at Stade de la Méno next week. And I think that would be the real litmus test, I think, because De Zerbi sides, from my experience as a Brighton fan as well, they play really, 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 really well with intensity against teams that go out to get them, which is really effective in the Premier League when you're playing against your Man Cities, your Arsenals, your Liverpools. And I think you've seen a bit of that with De Zerbi's side against Real Madrid and PSG. I think the real litmus test will be against Strasbourg, a difficult team that have actually really bothered OM in the past, last season even.
Well, we're going to talk about Strasbourg and the rest of the Ligue 1 action in part two. We're also going to be reflecting on the Ballon d'Or ceremony. Before we take a very quick break, I have a little quiz question. George and JJ, if you know, maybe don't shout the answer out just yet. But Ousmane Dembélé winning the Ballon d'Or yesterday, fantastic. The sixth Frenchman to win it. Could anybody tell me who is the last Ballon d'Or winner to have won the prize whilst playing in Ligue 1? That's something that I think's an easy question, but that's kind of because I've had it in my mind for a long time. JJ's nodding.
The answer's one of those technicalities, I'm pretty sure.
Is it? I don't know. I hope I've got the right answer. But yeah, little bonus if you know the year as well as the person. We'll be back with part two in just a moment. Lots more to talk about. Welcome back to Across the Channel with George Boxall, Jonathan Johnson and myself, Matthew Spiro. There was another big derby in France at the weekend. It took place at the Stade Félix Bollard-de-Lellis, and Lens ran out to 3-0 winners over Lille. A huge victory. Lille had been going great guns, unbeaten, 10 points from 4 matches. This was the biggest home derby victory for Lens in more than 50 years. And Jonathan, it was obviously a deserved victory. And as far as Lille are concerned, an infuriating one, obviously, to lose to their rivals. But also seeing Florian Thauvin starring for Les Saint-Yor. Florian Thauvin, who famously signed for Lille. Not sure what year, was it 2014? He signed for Lille, sort of regretted it, I think, and thought, oh gosh, Marseille are in for me as well. So did an about turn, left Lille without even playing for them. So, he's not particularly popular up there, but he was excellent. He scored, very influential. He's a good signing, and JJ, big win this for Lens.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning sort of Tauvin's turn as a pantomime villain in a Lille shirt, because if I remember it correctly, he signed mid-season in a January window, I think from Bastia, and then got loaned back to Bastia. And by the time the season had finished, he played so well that Marseille came in for him, and then he never actually made an appearance for Lille. So the only time that anyone saw him with a Lille shirt was that sort of announcement where he's holding the shirt to say, I've joined the club, I'm going to be there in 6 months' time or whatever, and ultimately wasn't. But no, I mean, like you said, to see Thauvin back to this kind of form, fantastic. No arguments about the result. I think Genesio's comments summed it all up, where he said they walked all over us, which, I think they did from start to finish. Okay, the third goal was a little bit scrappy, but I think it's wonderful when you see sort of Lens performing that way in front of their home crowd. Big fan of, sort of that kind of northern derby atmosphere. Even got the northern weather, which, Lille can't argue that they're not accustomed to that kind of downpour and the kind of the grim conditions at times that the game got played out in. But really, wonderful to see sort of Lens sort of handle themselves that way. And I think, the more that Thauvin sort of gets to know his new teammates and continues to play this way, there's no reason to think that he couldn't be an outside bet, to make his way back into Didier Deschamps' plans for the World Cup. As we've sort of touched on in previous episodes of the pod, he was a member of the 2018 World Cup winning squad, even if, he wasn't sort of a key regular contributor at that time. But, I do think he brings a kind of skill set and technical touch that could, potentially be useful to somebody like Deschamps, who obviously has the understanding with the player from, all those sorts of years, keeping an eye on him at international level. So great game, really good advert for Ligue 1, and a shame for Lille as well, because I feel like they could really be one of the teams that puts a bit of pressure on PSG at the top of the table, but they seem to sort of have this frustrating ability really to perform really well despite all of the changing pieces in the team and get results against some of their big sort of rivals for those spots, like Monaco, for example, but then also have those moments where ultimately maybe the limitations numerically of the squad that they have, will come back and bite them, especially once continental duty starts up for them, I think this week, actually.
Yes, indeed. George, Lens have basically lost pretty much all of the players from the side that came second 3 years ago. One or two, Sotoka and Grady, still there, but a lot of the big names have gone. But they've got a coach I know that you admire, and I have to say I'm a big fan of Pierre Sage as well, who I thought did an unbelievable job at Lyon, and John Textor probably one of the only people in the world who would have taken that decision to sack him when he did. And the early signs are promising for Pierre Sage at Lens.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to you about this last night. How I've been a bit of a Sagiste, a bit of a fanboy of Pierre Sage since his days as the assistant manager at Red Star. I remember bumping into him in the car park after a game against Versailles, and asking for an interview with him, and him saying, "Oh, on va parler de la match. We're going to talk about the match, mais pas le résultat, but not the result." A proper coach's coach kind of response. Yeah, I really, really, really like his style of play, and obviously I've seen it at Red Star, you've seen it at Lyon, and I think he really does fit into the culture at Lens a bit like the way the way in Frank Hayes did in terms of his character, very hardworking, charbonnel kind of character, and I just there's real good energy around Lens at the moment, especially when you're watching the scenes with the ultras and the kind of the displays. Obviously, the let's kick them dogs, the tifo displays and everything. You can really feel a real buzz around the place. Obviously, there will be for a Northern Derby, and I think I'd like to echo what Jonathan said about Florian Thauvin. You know, the prospect of him potentially getting a call up for the French national team is one of those kind of resurgent stories that feels really salivating. But yeah, I'd like to add he brings a real kind of fresh air to Ligue 1 as well, and that Lens side, and you can really feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, Lens are up to 7th. They've got 9 points. Just to give you the whole picture at the top of the table, PSG were actually knocked off the top by that goal they conceded from Naif Aguerd. It means that Monaco are above them on goal difference. We've got 4 teams on 12 points. Monaco defeated Metz by 5-2 on Sunday. Ansu Fati coming off the bench and scoring his first 2 goals in Ligue 1, having also scored in the Champions League a few days earlier. Lyon also have 12 points. They are third. They defeated Angers 1-0 thanks to a goal from Tanner Tessman. And Strasbourg, 12 points from 5 matches. And JJ, I know that you took in the Strasbourg game at the weekend. They were playing in the capital against Paris FC. What's it like at the Stade Jean-Bouin, and what was it like for that particular game?
Well, it was sunny. So while you guys were enduring the downpour in Marseille, I was lapping up the late summer sunshine in Paris. Honestly, it's quite a strange experience to sort of do what you would normally do pre-match, going to a game at Parc des Princes, but then obviously to be crossing to the other side of the road and going in at Jean-Bouin instead. I think there's definitely a few teething problems in terms of the organisation, in terms of getting into the stadium, a lot of long queues kind of snaking around in the roads, sort of just between Parc des Princes and Jean-Bouin. But obviously once you get inside the stadium and the game got underway, really, really impressive actually. I really enjoyed the experience. Sure, there were a couple of things that maybe I would have had slightly differently. I'll get onto sort of the continued silence of the Strasbourg ultras in the away end, which was packed out by the way. But
John, let's sorry to interrupt, but let's go into that, because for me that's the story, and I didn't mean to cut you in mid-flow, but yeah, Strasbourg winning 3-2, but it must have been a bizarre kind of atmosphere with those fans. Just again, in case people haven't followed the stories, but supporters who are demonstrating, protesting against the multi-club ownership that Strasbourg have got. Emmanuel Emega, the captain, who has announced his move to Chelsea. So is that right? They were just not making any noise, or some were, some weren't?
Well, yeah, so disclaimer, I was actually at this game, sort of in, I guess you would term it sort of the home section, or at least the mixed section, because I definitely wasn't in with the Strasbourg fans, even if I was attending with a very vociferous Strasbourg fan and surrounded by a number of very vociferous Strasbourg fans. But basically, Strasbourg's ultras regularly boycott sort of the first 15 minutes of Ligue, well, any competitive game, don't really sort of engage in their usual chants and the fantastic atmosphere they build up, whether they're home or away. Now, this time, that extended beyond 15 minutes and was essentially, I wouldn't say a full match protest, but there was definitely minimal noise even when Strasbourg scored. And you mentioned sort of Emega, the fact that he was so heavily involved in the 2 goals, scoring the third, but also sort of providing the assist for the second. And I think it's quite telling that sort of the ultras, the Strasbourg ultras, are going to try to stand behind their message that they've been trying to send to the club's owners, Blue Co, but also sort of long-standing president Marc Keller, who they recognize has done so much for the club, sort of having picked them up, in the lower tiers, sort of bringing them back to the top of the French footballing pyramid, and sort of the rebuilding operation that was behind it. But there's a lot of frustration now at sort of his decision to essentially cede decision-making control to Bluco, and the fact that he's still sort of in position, calling the shots, asking for sort of the respect to the fans, which they feel he hasn't shown them in return by sort of selling them into the multi-club ownership group. So it's a very tricky sort of scenario, and it was really jarring to see at the weekend, because you've got this very new fan culture building at Paris FC, and I know that George has very strong views on that. But you have this very old school, very traditional fan base as well from Strasbourg, really trying to cling to their values as best they can. And they certainly don't seem like they're going to be backing down anytime soon from that stance.
I think as well it's important to say that a lot of Strasbourg fans are not happy with the Ultras, and that there's kind of this split. Leon Rossignol saying it's just a minority of fans who are acting this way. You mentioned Marc Keller. His presence has always been seen as very important symbolically. Like, he's done a huge amount in building this football club back up when they were bankrupt and down in the amateur divisions. He held a press conference before the game earlier last week, saying, that they're not going to tolerate this behaviour anymore, these protests, and they're going to be searching supporters thoroughly when they go into the stadium, taking any anti-Bluco banners off people. Is that the way to go, though, George? Can you control supporters in that sort of way? Can you tell supporters what they should be thinking? Or where is this going? Can this be a sustainable sort of successful season for Strasbourg, or is this heading for a bit of a car crash?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say on the wider point of multi-club ownership in French football, I think what you've also seen this week in the stands, if you follow the ultra movement a little bit, there's been a little bit of a sense of solidarity between other ultra groups in Ligue 1. There was a banner from Bad Gones, Lyon's Bad Gones. There was also a banner last night that I managed to see from Marseille's MTP group, basically saying, solidarity with Strasbourg's ultra group, or the Ultra Boys, and that multi-ownership is the biggest threat to French football. Now, I've obviously got experience as a Red Star fan in kind of how supporter protests happen, and how difficult it really is to once you've actually ceded a club to a multi-club ownership model, how difficult it really is to win back fans. I've had that experience at Red Star because once supporters draw their red lines and say this is unacceptable, it's not likely that they're going to renegade on these red lines, and especially in Strasbourg's situation where you've essentially had them warning that this is what's going to happen if we're part of the Bluco model. And when you have things starting to happen that they originally said were going to happen, it intensifies that sense of unfairness or basically unfairness. And the same happened at Red Star. Ultras at the start protested the sale of the club to 777 Partners, and when things and events started happening the ultras originally said were going to happen, aka, well, a massive fraud scheme happening. Supporters are kind of energized by that, and they say, well, we told you so. So Mark Keller is in a really, really, really difficult position because he has to kind of be the de facto spokesperson for Strasbourg. But these protests aren't going to die down. They're not going to die down easily. And I think what happens when you announce kind of restrictive, kind of Plan Le Preux-esque kind of sanctions on supporters and limiting what they can or can't say, I think that only energizes kind of protest more. And when you start restricting kind of ultra groups, you start to see kind of a level of solidarity with other ultra groups. So don't be surprised if you'll start to see other kind of banners around Ligue 1 that will touch the subject of multi-ownership.
Yeah, really, really interesting story, and good to hear your insight, George. I know you're very knowledgeable on fan movements, ultras, and I know I've mentioned as well before we're going to do a Strasbourg special. I want to do a Paris FC special. There's going to be, maybe George, I won't invite you to the Paris FC special, but being a Red Star fan and not necessarily a big Paris FC advocate, but yeah. So much to get into. Unfortunately, today we're not going to have the time to talk about all of that. I want to just sort of wrap up in terms of the weekend's action. We had another derby, a Western derby between Nantes and Rennes. Rennes were 2-0 up at the Bourgeois. They got pegged back, and incredibly, Youssef El Arabi scored the equaliser to make it 2-2 in the 96th minute. His first goal since 2011. So it was almost like we got in a time machine this weekend. We went back to 2011 when Gignac was crashing goals past, was it Sirigu in the Marseille goal? Or
when you and I were just meeting, Matt.
When we just met, and so we've gone back to a different era. So obviously a blow that for Rennes. Decent little point for Nantes, but they're finding the going quite tough. Brest have been finding the going tough, but they got a brilliant 4-1 win over Nice. A lot of concern down in Nice about where their season is going, but well done to Brest and Ludovic Ajorc, who scored and turned in a really strong performance. Auxerre got a 1-0 victory over Toulouse, thanks to Danny Namasso, the Reading-born Cameroon international. And the other game saw Le Havre draw 1-1 with Lorient. So we're going to wrap up relatively quickly, by talking about the Ballon d'Or. We're not going to be able to do it justice, are we? But JJ, because George and I were busy having a post-match beer in Marseille, we didn't watch the ceremony, but I saw a bit of Ousmane's speech, and I was very touched by it. Last year I had the very enjoyable and interesting experience of going to Evreux and meeting his some of his old coaches and his old mates, and it is an amazing story, because he just strikes me as such a sort of, I don't know if normal guy is the word, because he's got a slightly different personality to most, but there's a very human kind of element, isn't there, to Ousmane Dembélé. He's a bit vulnerable in terms of, his injuries. He's got quite a frail build. I've always absolutely loved watching him play, like even when he's been wasteful, even when he's been inconsistent, which, he has for much of his career, but he's a sensational footballer, and it was a lovely moment to see him, and his mum all sort of, choked up. I mean, it doesn't get much better than winning the Ballon d'Or, does it?
No, it doesn't. And, I think one of the things that really always strikes me about Dembele is just, how humble he is. It's very easy to relate to him. And you mentioned sort of the inconsistency, the infuriating inconsistency that he's shown over the course of his career. But he has those moments as well during games where he does something that you feel like even in like a kick around with your mates, you'd be capable of making the same mistake as well. So he does sort of regularly remind people that he's human. But I think this is very much a Ballon d'Or, not just for PSG, but for the whole of Ligue 1, because it's he's a player who was born and raised in the French system, came through the fantastic Rennes Academy, broke onto the scene in Ligue 1, went abroad, had experiences with Dortmund, with Barca, had moments as well where he shone, sort of on the continental scene, but then came back to PSG and to Ligue 1 as somebody who's determined to make the most of all of this talent that he never really tapped into and properly had properly refined. And I think that ultimately contributes to the overwhelming success that's finally been crowned with this Ballon d'Or, because it's not just the reflection of the fact that his last 12 months have been phenomenal and that he was part of this all-conquering PSG side that's made history for French football on the European scene, but he's also somebody who's managed to finally get hold of himself, discover who he is as an athlete, really start taking himself seriously, really devoting himself to maximizing his career. And I think that it's a fair reward for him, because when everything falls into place like that, there's not always a guarantee, because of the politicized nature of these kind of awards ceremonies, that the people who are most deserving, in my case, Dembele this time, always win these prizes. So it is fantastic to see, him, justice done to him. But also I think people shouldn't forget that this is very much a Ballon d'Or victory that can be celebrated by all of Ligue 1, notably as well by Rennes, who launched his career. And I think it's, seeing some of their content attached to Dembele's success has also been really heartwarming as well.
Yeah, just to add to what you were saying about those skills, like that you want to see as a supporter. During that day in Evra, we were being shown round by Ousmane Dembele's good or best mate, Mustafa Diatta, who was also a good footballer, followed Ousmane to Dortmund and then to Spain. He took us to the little sort of park, which was like a square basically, where they had like little. They weren't even goals; they used benches as goals. And he was telling us about some of the kickabouts, and he said he remembers kickabouts where he was playing with Ousmane, and they were playing against Ferland Mendy and Dio Upamecano. And you're like, oh, right, okay. Like, so when Ousmane was sort of, I don't know, 12, 13, he was playing with those guys, and like Mustafa was laughing, going, yeah, it was Champions League. Even back then it was Champions League. But I mean, that it shows you as well the level that he was having to play against just to win those little games. But that sort of, streetwise, off the cuff kind of way of playing, has really stuck with him. And I'm absolutely delighted. George, as a Marseille-based reporter, are you happy for Ousmane?
No, honestly, I can't do the same justice that you guys have just done for Ousmane Dembele. But what I will say is that he does reflect, having been in Paris and having looked at kind of the hotbed of talent as the somewhat overused term of footballers come from the banlieue. You can see he really represents that style, that off the cuff style that you just described. He's never had a linear sort of progression. He's always had to kind of fight, adapt, find his place, and even at PSG, like I remember. I was at that Arsenal game where he got into trouble with Luis Enrique for was it for being late for training? And he said no, you're out the side. And even since then, the way he's developed, as Jonathan said, I've actually seen Jonathan kind of like be very, very frustrated at Ousmane Dembélé. I remember when we used to cover PSG together, it used to be a bit of a thing. But even at PSG, that kind of progression that we've seen, he's simply sensational. He's simply been sensational. But he 100% deserves it,
Yeah, and to be fair to JJ, when you see what Ousmane's done in the last 12 months, you can understand why people were frustrated with him scoring 2, 3, 4 goals in a season, getting injured, coming back. It has been frustrating. I remember vividly his hat trick when I think he was 18, playing for Rennes against Nantes in the big Western Derby, and you're like, wow, this guy's unbelievable. And speaking to some ex-pros as well, saying, maybe not saying future Ballon d'Or, but like, wow, what a player we've got on our hands. And it took time. It took time, and fair play, I would say to Luis Enrique for unlocking that fantastic talent. It's a wonderful coronation for him and for PSG. And we haven't mentioned the fact that there were 5 PSG players in the top 10 if we include Donnarumma, who was a PSG player last season. Well done to Vitinha. Third is sensationally good, of course. Some people suggesting Achraf Hakimi should be higher than 6th. I think they may be right. Nuno Mendes in 10th.
I think the stunner was Fabian Ruiz being in the 20s, wasn't he? That did surprise me, to be fair.
I think he was just below 20. We've got Neves in 19. I'm just having a look. I know, but I mean, it's, we talk about Ousmane. The name that that jumps out of me is Serhou Guirassy again, because I remember commentating him when he was playing for Amiens and he was falling over his own feet and stuff. And you're like, this guy maybe doesn't have the level for Ligue 1. He might have to go back to Ligue 2. But that is the beauty of football. And actually, what a player he is. Okay, he needed a different environment, a different league ultimately to flourish. But it's great. It's great to see somebody like that going to Germany and becoming hugely prolific.
He was top scorer in the Champions League last season?
Yeah. Another of these wonderful players to have come through the French system, I believe. Did Serhou came through in France?
Pretty sure he did, yeah.
I hope I'm not ending on an erroneous note. Talking of erroneous notes, JJ, do you know who was the last Ballon d'Or winner playing in Ligue 1 when crowned?
You had Messi was crowned Ballon d'Or when he was at PSG, was he not?
Oh, you're right, I think. Yeah, that is totally not what I was thinking. But you're right. George, would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Because for me, I was going to say I thought it was Jean-Pierre Papin, 1991. Thank goodness that JJ was here because I hadn't checked my facts. Lionel Messi, obviously. There we go. So, lads, I thought that was a really good, informative pod, and we've ended it with a bit of blundering from me. But it's been great to have you.
You were right. Guirassy, by the way, is Laval. So shout out to Baptiste as well,
and Aubameyang, and all the Laval people. JJ and George, thanks a lot for coming on this morning. It's been a real pleasure. Please, once again, listeners, give us a little review. Subscribe to Across the Channel. We need your support. And if you want to get in contact, we've got an email address, acrossthechannelpodcast@gmail.com. You can send us messages on Twitter at @across_channel. We'll be back next Monday. Assuming there are no torrential downpours and postponements, we will be sticking to the Monday podcast. We'll see you again then. Have a great week. Goodbye, everybody. Ciao, ciao. Right.